Speculation continues on the future of X-Ray Hotel 558, the last flying Vulcan bomber. Protesters prepare to march on Parliament. Over the last 30 years, the Vulcan has captured the hearts of the nation's airshow goers like no other attraction. But Ministry of Defence officials are intransigent, saying simply there's no more money.
And where you have boxes of petitions, do you, or what?
Bob Franklin's got those.
He's got them.
The 34-year-old Vulcan is to be sold off to the highest bidder. The Vulcan B2 could go to an aircraft museum, or it might be bought by a scrap merchant for as little as £20,000 for its 90 tons of prime aluminium alloy. But supporters remain undaunted.
He is the person that will present this to the House, to the government, with the hope that it will change.
I'm sealing this petition in response to enormous public pressure and support for the saving of this great aircraft and the final example of it.
You, the great British public, are representing the will that will get this, hopefully, changed by the government.
I support this campaign very enthusiastically because it is dedicated to a cause which I think to be important and most certainly worthwhile. I think the Vulcan, the last one still flying, deserves to be preserved because it is a piece of British aviation history, and that is something of which the nation can be very proud. The Spitfire and Hurricane and Lancaster are the symbols of victory in the air in the Second World War, and the Vulcan is the symbol of our victory in the Cold War which followed the Second World War. And therefore, in the same way that the Spitfire, Hurricane and Lancaster deserve to be preserved and honoured, so does the Vulcan.
Wisconsin aircraft, ready to select 05. Wisconsin aircraft, ready to select 05. Common floor.
This is an important aircraft with an important background, and it should be saved for the nation. And we'll ask why, in many years to come, why we didn't if we fail at this time.
Today, Britain's last flying Vulcan takes to the air on its final mission, a nostalgic tour of former V-bomber bases before landing for the last time at Brontingthorpe in Leicestershire. When Vulcan XH558 arrives at its new home, it's unlikely to ever fly again, and its 30-year RAF service will have come to an end. This is Sarah D reporting from RAF Waddington.
Okay, radar over taxi. 60, checked. 100, 110, 120, 130, decision rotate.
It was a very emotional moment seeing the old lady leaving Waddington for the last time. They had farewell taped on the inside of the bomb doors, and very nostalgic moment. There were tears in many eyes, including my own, as she went past on her final fly past.
To many awaiting the Vulcan's final landing at Bruntingthorpe Airfield, it was like losing an old friend. Some arrived in black ties, and there were unashamed tears as the Vulcan thundered into history above them.
One of the highlights for me at an air show is the Vulcan display. On the second half, he'll do a wing over, and then he'll bring it into a 360-degree turn over the crowd line with the bomb doors open. The howl from the engines is just unbelievable. Some people think that there's something wrong with the engines at that particular point, but to any Vulcan enthusiast, it's music to their ears. My little lad Michael, he loves the Vulcan. He loves it. And I've took him to a few shows, and like everybody else, you know, he just looks with his mouth open, gobsmacked. Sadly, that'll never be seen again now.
There's nothing else like it, is there? You know, you go to all these different air shows and there's nothing like this thing flying. It's a blinking shame. It is really.
If I'd had the money when I bought it, I think I'd have secretly mortgaged my house, yes, but where to put it, I just don't know. It would have been a coup, wouldn't it? Finished now?
Yep, I'm finished now.
Well, this is the flight book that has been handed to me now by the pilot of the aircraft, all signed and signed up. So now it has finished its life with the RAF, and the logbook is now finished until sometime when it may fly again.
The tender submission for the Air Ministry specification B3546 by Avro's was a Delta 4-jet aircraft. The advantage of the Delta was you could get everything inside. It made a clean aeroplane in the sense that it created very deep wing sections which would house the engines and at the same time all the fuel tanks, and permit the bomb compartment to be in the fuselage, which meant that you could fly at very high speed. That's at the beginning. Then the problems start. Somebody had to decide that you were going to actually cut metal and start really doing it.
In the company's wind tunnel at Woodford, the aerodynamic characteristics of the new planform were thoroughly investigated. So little was known of the practical behavior of the Delta wing that an unusual decision was made. Experimental aircraft, exact third-scale replicas of the new bomber, were built for research into the handling characteristics of aircraft of this shape. It was at this stage, early in 1950, that Mr. Rowley Falk joined the company. Mr. Falk probably knows more about Delta wing aircraft than any other pilot. He began development flights at a crucial stage.
2 third-scale research aircraft were built to try out the flying characteristics for the projected bomber. The 707A was made for high-speed flying, and the 707B for low-speed handling. As soon as we were thoroughly satisfied with the low-speed handling of the Deltas, I started on testing the high-speed aircraft, the 707A.
It was the first time any Delta wing aircraft had flown in Britain, and it aroused great curiosity, which wasn't entirely confined to the aeronautical profession.
During all the Delta test flights, automatic cameras recorded readings on the dials of the 24 instruments. The film was removed for immediate development after each flight, so that the readings of every instrument at known intervals of time could be examined.
While all this research was going on, a full-scale mock-up of the Vulcan was built. In addition, the company installed several new test rigs. In this rig, the power-operated flying control system has been laid out exactly as planned for the aircraft. Typical movements applied to the stick by the pilot could be reproduced, and the responses of the controls analyzed. On the same rig, large lead discs represent the mass of the ailerons, elevators, and rudder. Hundreds of hours flying could thus be condensed into a short space of time. On the hydraulics test rig, the undercarriage was tested under loads representing conditions of actual flight. Another test rig was built to examine engine bay installations and to check pressures and temperatures. Because of the extreme altitude at which the Vulcan was to fly, some special research was also needed on the pressure cabin. This was completely immersed in a water tank and water pressure applied to the inside. Special research was also conducted on the window glass, which was tested to destruction. Glass panels were mounted on a frame representing the windscreen, and the assembly bolted to the steel cover of a pressure vessel. A complete aircraft was also built for structural tests, and has successfully withstood loads exceeding the design requirements. Saturday, the 30th of August, 1952. The first Vulcan prototype was ready to fly. 4.5 years of intensive work had gone into the making of this aircraft. It was a huge aeroplane, and quite unlike anything of its size that had flown before. But its test pilot, because of his experience of the 707s, was full of confidence. He'd already flown Deltas for dozens of hours.
698, taxi clearance. Clear to taxi, runway 26.
Unlike the launching of a ship, the first flight of an aircraft is not a ceremonial event. The only people present were a few of the firm's staff, to whom this day meant so much.
The first Vulcan flew from here, piloted by our chief superintendent, he was of test flying, Rowley Falk. He came out of the building here, pointed over to the flight sheds, taxied down the runway to the parking area, turned it round, did all his checks.
698, take off. 698, Woodford Tower, cleared for takeoff.
halfway down the runway, it was airborne. And he took it away over Holloway Edge. It was airborne for 2¼ hours. Now that particular day, believe me, it stopped the whole of Cheshire, the traffic, everything, ground to a standstill, because he'd never seen anything like this at all. He thought it was only out of space. He really was terrific. It was a terrific day in aviation.
And I saw the Vulcan hurtle down the runway, and it was just opposite me when the rear bogies actually left the ground, and I cried.
Only 3 days after its first flight, the prototype made a dramatic appearance at the SBAC display at Farnborough. Falk flew it alone. This 50-ton aeroplane could be flown single-handed. The production of the Vulcan had been planned from the time when the aircraft was just a pencil outline. 50,000 special tools had to be made to put the first squadron of Vulcans into the air. Each aircraft is built up from over 100,000 separate parts. Shown here is a universal rib assembly jig. Each rib, exactly made, has its place in the wing assembly jig. In this 5,000-ton rubber press, large parts can be produced in one operation, thereby lowering costs. And so the Vulcan goes into production with special virtues as a bomber.
The wings were built in the jigs here at Woodford, but the centre sections were shipped from the Chadwick factory in Manchester to Woodford for assembly. Now we used to bring the centre section up from Chadwick to Woodford in the early hours of the morning, say between 5 and 6 o'clock. And to make sure that we were in the safety factor, all the lampposts along the A6 coming from Manchester right up to practically through the Stockport area, they were hinged so we could get past them and then put them back. And the company paid for all this. It was a very big operation because the centre section is a massive size and they had to have a police escort.
Ingenuity with excellence of aircraft design have combined to produce a bomber of immense striking power. But the ability to design and build a beautiful looking aircraft which meets its original specification isn't enough in itself.
During the flight testing of the Delta aircraft, the simple Delta wing created problems in the sense that compressibility effects occurred and buffeting occurred at the wing tip, reducing the ability of the aircraft to achieve its critical Mach number.
The Avro flutter and response simulators can tell aircraft designers precisely how their project will react to control movements or disturbances in the air when it flies. Here, the simulated disturbance to an aircraft damps out quickly. At a different configuration, the same disturbance leads to a nosedive. Added to these aids is the very latest digital computer, popularly known as the electronic brain. The problems translated into perforations on a roll are fed into the computer. Calculations which would have taken a month can now be condensed into a matter of minutes. In this tunnel, speeds up to Mach 1.6 can be reached, and Avros are now building a third wind tunnel for research into Mach numbers as high as 3.5. Observers wait for the shockwave to appear on the Schlieren screen.
solution was to modify the leading edge sweepback, which was that, to sweeping that part of the leading edge forward, and at the same time doubling the chord length, and this was the shape that ultimately became the production version of the Vulcan.
As the Vulcan's teething problems were being ironed out, the Avro design team were also developing a delta-winged airliner based on the military version. Unofficially named the Avro Atlantic, the projected aircraft would have been larger than the Vulcan, with a wingspan of 121 feet and a length of 145. Like the Delta bomber, it was a very advanced design for the period, boasting specifications and performance far beyond that of existing airliners. The physical dimensions of the wing were so large that fuel tanks adequate for long non-stop journeys could be housed, leaving a spacious fuselage for a maximum of 131 passengers. Three variants of the aircraft were envisaged, with the luxury version sporting bar, galley, lounge and makeup rooms. The Avro Atlantic project never progressed beyond the basic design stage, though the research data gathered proved valuable in the Vulcan's further refinements.
It was unique, really, in the fact that it was a fully electrical aeroplane. Although the controls were guided by levers from the cockpit, at the end they worked into electro-hydraulic units.
A field box enables the pilot to retain the same feel of the aircraft as if he were using manual controls.
The electrical power generated by the Vulcan would have lit a small village. Although I have 4 generators, one on each engine, any one particular generator would have kept the aeroplane in flight and kept it securely supplied with electricity for all that it required to do. If one were unlucky enough to lose all the generators at very high altitude, then the pilot could pull a handle which would drop out a ram air turbine. It would give you 13 kilowatts of power and allow you to descend and keep the flying controls working.
When Rolls-Royce Falk flew the Vulcan down to Farnborough and then he brought it back to Woodford, as he was coming back, he came over the new assembly, that's the name of our workshops here at Woodford, and he rolled it like a fighter. We couldn't believe it that such a massive aircraft could be rolled. And he smashed all the glass in the roof of the new assembly, and it was like that for a long time, all taped up, till the roof was redone. I've never forgot that, and even the crowd that was here and all the workforce thought it was terrific.
The Vulcan rode admirably. It was really a wonderful aeroplane to fly in, and the fact that a pilot could roll it, and if you were attending to what you were doing on the desk in front of you, you were barely conscious that you'd done a roll. However, in Farnborough, I think it was about 1950, 57, 58, we actually did rolls off the top. You start as though you're going to do a loop. So you apply the power, push forward, and pull the stick back. And when you're upside down, then you just roll it out into forward flight the right way up. Put the nose down, and you perform a figure of 8 on its side. So it's very good. Great stuff.
The manoeuvrability of the airplane was quite remarkable. The great wing area and the low wing loading meant that at high altitude the airplane was still extremely manoeuvrable, and when set against fighters of the day such as the Lightning, we could easily outturn the fighters without any trouble at all. The fighter tended to set up his line of approach towards the bomber and would almost have to go ballistic. He only, of course, has little wings that are highly loaded and is less able to turn in the thin air of more than 40,000 feet. but the great wing area here allowed us to cling on and to turn very sharply indeed. What was unusual about the aeroplane was that while traditional aeroplanes will depend on elevators for pitch control and ailerons for roll control, the Vulcan has elevons which combine both pitch and roll. If one compares the maneuverability of the Vulcan with other bombers of the day, such as the American ones, perhaps the B-52, there is just no comparison at all. The Vulcan had almost fighter-style performance and turn radius, which was quite sparkling by the standards of the day. So this very satisfying handful of throttle levers here was the medium through which the pilot controlled the 4 Olympus turbojets, totaling 80,000 pounds of thrust. While on the left there was this quite wonderful fighter-style control column. The flying controls, of course, are all power, so there's no direct and natural feel for the pilot of the flying controls. Therefore, the same force would need to be exercised for the same displacement at all speeds. Now, that could actually end up overstressing the whole airframe. So the pilot was provided with a form of artificial feel, which modified his inputs and provided an increased force for the same displacement at a higher speed. And thus, in that way, the pilot was protected from potentially overstressing the airplane. The little black and yellow cover here actually provided a means of relieving the artificial feel, which when pressed, the system ran to its minimum setting, and then the pilot was in a position where the potential for overstress was now possible. On the top there was the trim system, provided the pilot with trim in pitch, nose up and nose down, and in roll, so that if there were out of balance forces between the control surfaces, the pilot could correct for these using the trim. On the right was the transmit button, your interface with the outside world. At the back here there's an instinctive cutout for the autopilot, so that when under autopilot control, should anything untoward or unexpected happen, the pilot naturally would grab the stick, and in so doing would instinctively squeeze that switch, the instinctive cutout. At the bottom of the stick there is a button which controls the nose wheel steering, or energizes the nose wheel steering, via the rudder pedals. So it was quite an awkward button to press, as one had to, at about 80 knots, having started out like this, then translate your hand, insinuate your hand up the control column, so that by 120, 130 knots, you were then ready to make an input to rotate the airplane for flight. The Vulcan instruments are presented in the standard T pattern, which has been a feature of both military and civil airplanes since well before the war. Starting on the left here, you have an altimeter, which is fitted in any airplane really. Then the airspeed indicator. Moving around the top, we have a Mach meter. You can see the telltale here shows that the in-service Mach limit was about 0.93, which service crews could routinely go to. But in test, I believe that Mach 1 was certainly approached and possibly exceeded. Below that we have the attitude direction indicator, part of the Smith's military flight system. And it's through this that the pilot received his instructions in both pitch and roll for all forms of attack and instrument approach to airfields. The nav radar would receive the information and process that so that the pilot received a steering command left or right on this instrument here. Top right we have a radio altimeter, which provided the pilot with accurate information of height above the ground, of great use at low level, because one was then able to accurately judge the height at which you were flying. Pilots became pretty good at generally assessing their altitude, but to be truly accurate, one referred to the radio altimeter.
had the electronic countermeasures. The ECM was very advanced for the time. There was a tail-looking radar, which was very good, known as Red Steer. We had a transmitter known as Red Shrimp that incorporated 3 transmitters that covered the entire communications band and the radio and television. On one of our first sorties up in the northeast of England, just off the coast, we operated the equipment, and to a lot of people's annoyance, we caused a lot of trouble with their radio and television for about half an hour. The usual thing after that was that we had to put in a 24-hour request to the government, and it was a cabinet decision that would allow us to work the ECM.
Temperature selector, normal. Temperature control switch, neutral. Cold air turbine, black. Peterhead heaters, test and off. External lights, test and off. Monitor alarm switch, monitor. Tank pressurization, off. Nitrogen purge, off. Flight refueling master, off. Engine airframe anti-icing, off.
This is really the master warning panel for the pilot. At the start of takeoff, the amber lights would be out. The red flashing light would also be out. And these doll's eyes, or magnetic indicators, should all be black. As you can see in this particular instance, they're not. So that would not be a go situation for takeoff. But under normal circumstances, all the lights would be out and all of the doll's eyes would be black. So at a glance, the pilot could visually assess the condition of the systems that he was controlling.
On the 23rd of July 1959, we were to take off in Vulcan XA891 for an engine development sortie. As we took off, I noticed that I had some lights coming up. It ought to be now. And then eventually I had 7 lights, all red lights, to tell me that we'd lost all our electrical power. And I informed the captain of this, and he requested what I would like him to do. And obviously I said he'll land immediately, but it was apparent that we didn't have that facility, and so he just said climbing, and we climbed to 16,000 feet. Having tried all the tricks we knew about, switching off all the generators and trying them on individually, nothing would work. The captain decided that we would head further east and try and get the aeroplane away from high-density population areas. And he tried to make an attempt to get into Waddington, but on the instant of him trying to disturb the aeroplane to turn right onto approximately a 90-degree turn, the aeroplane went into a flat spin, and he then shouted, "Bail out, bail out, bail out." On came the abandoned aircraft light switch, and off I went, and my parachute deployed, and thankfully we all 5 made it down to the ground, and at that particular time we were the only complete crew to have successfully escaped from a Vulcan. To demonstrate how quickly we could get off to the Ministry of Defence. In fact, we could start up in 27 seconds, and in 2 minutes we were airborne and away, undercarriage up and all power on.
You could have a simultaneous 4-engine start by pressing this centre button here, which was quite an amazing experience, having pressed the button with a sudden rush of noise, sound, and as you look back, everything seemed to be happening on the centre console, or the centre instrument panel, with everything suddenly coming alive. And in a very short space of time, you could be on your way.
checked.
Officer 5, 1 ahead.
100, 110, 120, 130, decision rotate. And it goes up. Selected 3 minutes.
Which 2-1?
Steers in. Okay.
Roger Harvey, have you?
Definitely.
You've certainly got special.
Except when I come here, get me going for it. My bacon for my breakfast.
Flies off the council. It's not quite square, see that? It's your drain valve. It's that drain valve.
The aims of the club were to keep the aeroplane in a reasonably good order and hopefully to keep it as a live aeroplane, in that we could make the systems work and that the engines would be turned over and kept in a reasonable state. We were allowed into a hangar for a couple of years, which helped quite a lot, and we were able to sort out some of the problems that occurred with the aeroplane. And then unfortunately we were put back outside, but when an aeroplane is outside for a long time, then deterioration sets in. So we worked quite hard to arrest the problems of the weather on the aeroplane, and so we are maintaining a reasonable state of serviceability on most of the equipment, but unfortunately we now find that we're doing the same maintenance on parts of the aeroplane that we were doing 2 years ago.
Most of the aircraft, big parts of the aircraft, has been stripped. I've reskinned, like the undercarriage doors, the doors on the front. We fitted a new rudder on the back. That was a mountaineering act we did outside. We made a scaffold ourselves, and the old-timers did it. I never thought we would, but we did. And, you know, to keep the aircraft in a more or less set-up situation, which I was very proud to do. And most of the team that work on this, the average age is around 70 years old. And in the 20 people that won it, there's over 1,000 years service going back to Avro days. We're all 40-year people, and we built the 138 of these that we did. We built them all.
We can say things like that, you know. Before, you know, there's nothing to stop us putting a lamp across each bed that's on its side. Yeah. Well, it's full of relays. Yeah. Because that's all that they only pull over. Is it?
All we've got to do is put a lamp across the contact.
Yeah.
And see it operates.
Well, yeah, that's right.
What are the output numbers? You want the output?
Well, we only wanted to turn a pair of, well...
transfer to start.
We could check it.
Yeah, well, we're trying to find out where
we could check each contact.
Yeah,
there's only two contacts.
Did run this morning?
the dry run.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know, I was just coming in.
With no audible click.
You've got to lamp before.
Oh yes, if Alan checks.
Oh no.
If Alan checks to see if we've got a circuit through the relay when it's operating, that's the main thing, isn't it?
Gordon, when I told Joan that we couldn't start number 4, she said, have we got a long enough taper?
Well, that's an idea.
I'm sorry, dear, he's just outside at present. He's on the aircraft. Can I ring you back?
Well, as soon as they come in, I'll get to buzz you.
This particular item, the window, which fits in the cockpit of the aircraft, originated for us from a car boot sale locally at Warrington, just locally. A friend of mine was walking around and actually saw the item and phoned me. When I got in contact with the people who owned the store, they said they had 8 of them. We bought all the lot, the 8, for £2 each. We need 8 windows, we've got them here.
Well, today we're going to try and run the engines for the first time in 3 years.
We've done dry runs before, but this is the first live run. We know that one of the engines isn't working properly. It's completely seized up, and we're just hoping that corrosion hasn't too badly affected the other three.
Going now.
Gentlemen, the reason why I've called it together, I must thank everyone who took part on the engine run on Saturday. It was a marvellous effort. I know we had a bit of bad luck with the engine, but still, I think we understand the reason why. We're not going to get very far until we get this aircraft under cover. And this is something I've got to take up with the company.
As the clock goes, they would arrive 3 hours before they start.
Skyward to the streaking silver that bespeaks tomorrow. All around, the straining fury of its power sets the very air ashudder.
I'm sure we're almost there.
Seals famous the world over are now working to capacity.
We have seen evidence that others had not been idle in building up powerful forces of destruction. Avro would build a Delta.
While all this research was going on, a full-scale mock-up of the Vulcan was built. In
As soon as we were thoroughly satisfied with the low-speed handling of the Deltas, I started on testing the...
And to remain in the forefront, new ideas must be developed to improve continuously the performance of aircraft. The first Vulcan prototype was ready to fly. 4.5 years of intensive work had gone into the making.
And so, the Vulcan joins the Royal Air Force. What began as a penciled outline...
Mike Bravo to Scampton, climbing on heading, captain to AO, climbing checks, oxygen, captain, co-pilot, Potter, radar, AO, content 7/8.
Being ready is routine, and being ready is doing the job. If the real alert ever comes, they've failed.
This will have increased all-round performance in range, speed, altitude, and carrying capacity.
To Norway or Naples, Nebraska
The
or
world
Nairobi.
took a step back from the brink of nuclear war today when Mr. Khrushchev promised that the Russian missiles based in Cuba would be dismantled. The RAF V-bomber force, which stood by at combat readiness for the past 3 days, has been stood down.
New Vulcan, world's biggest Delta. Futuristic giant. At Farnborough, this aircraft too gets into the aerobatic act.
Engines were built with a wingspan of 100 The RAF's strategic nuclear deterrent was officially handed over to the Polaris submarines of the Royal Navy today.
The winged plane, pinnacle of British bomber design, once had a key role in the country's nuclear defense.
The sortie itself, normal takeoff, from here up past Sheffield, 2 circuits round the Derwent and Lady
Bombing run at about 10 miles now. And crew from radar, this will be 2 or 4 aids on the control tower at Scampton Airfield. SOP run from the 3 miles, come at 1 mile.
We're just getting reports that an RAF Vulcan bomber has attacked Port Stanley Airfield. The lone Vulcan returned safely to its base on Ascension Island a little over 3 hours ago. It dropped 21,000-pound bombs on the runway.
So it comes as no surprise that we're moving on. More of the comments about sadness and moving occasions and so on have come from outsiders. generally people who've been able to stand back from it, and they can appreciate it perhaps a little more than we can. We're not yet certain precisely what aircraft will come back here to Scampton. We're fairly confident there will be aeroplanes here and flying will continue here. But it will indeed be a different place, but a lot of people tend to practice
days of 617's existence. Soon the squadron will be gone, their Vulcan bombers consigned to the breakers' yard.